After a failed invasion of infernals from beyond Cain, the Iron Kingdoms have begun to rebuild. In the aftermath of the claiming, new alliances have been formed, tested by a peace brought about by the lack of an obvious common enemy. Some nations have been hasty to put the tragedy behind them and stride bravely into this world, but for some, the sting of the infernal lash is still very raw. They know that without true and decisive action, this respite would be but a brief lull before the Nunnakarene order returns. The noble southern kingdom of Signar has led the rest of the Iron Kingdoms in rebuilding and emerging into the grand age of artistic greatness and technological refinement. Tumultuous lightning storms trapped within capacitors hum alongside the grinding metal mechanica of warjacks, hulking constructs of arcane machinery that strive through the streets of Caspia in parade formations led by the warcasters who control them. Meanwhile, the tattered remnants of the Order and its cultists continue their insidious work. In dark alleys and shadowy underworlds, out of sight from the ever-vigilant Order of Illumination, they perform profane rituals, fueled by the souls of unfortunate citizens left alone and forgotten by the claiming. Neutral in war, fattened by the spoils heaped upon it during the rebuilding after the claiming, and an ally to all but the most vilest of nations, the northeastern dominion of rule swells at the seams with political maneuvering and opportunities for profit. The mountain fortresses of the Ruic dwarves have become a natural nexus for those displaced by war, and for diplomats and spies from all over the Iron Kingdoms, each vying to undercut its rivals to win favor with rule. While Signar and Rule prospered since the defeat of the Infernals, other nations haven't been so lucky. As the sheep of the south sup on the fine wines of their renaissance, the wolves of Cador plot and plan in the cold reaches of their northern kingdom, their predatory eyes still locked on the riches of nations they recently fought to protect. Even in this time of nominal peace, Cadoran factories continue churning out weapons of war. Although Cador is at peace with the rest of the Iron Kingdoms, history has proven that the ambitions of its monarch are not so easily quelled. Once a driving force within Cain, the fanatical religious zealots of the Protectorate of Menoth have all but disappeared. While the remaining clergy do their best to hang on with what's left of their nation, most of their cities stand deserted. The instruments of divine punishment, forests of iron racks left scattered among the ruins of the once powerful kingdom. As the sun sets on the Protectorate and the shadows across its territory deepen, the threat of its crusades, once posed, have been replaced with the more mundane peril of scavenging vermin that skulk within the bones of its former settlement. Lands known as the Iron Kingdoms have been shaped by strong faiths, the acts of the gods themselves, and centuries of conflict. They are home to proud peoples whose identities and cultures are inextricably linked to the ground upon which they built their homes and cities. And although they have survived plague, famine, war, invasion, and the horrors of the claiming, the citizens of these kingdoms, and the people of the wilds that surround them, know that their greatest challenges may yet lie ahead. Many myths and legends are told and retold around harps and campfires throughout western Emerald, describing the origins of the world, the coming of the gods, and the shaping of beasts and people who populate the cities and wild places of the continent. Of these, one of the most common, at least among the predominantly human kingdoms, was the one of Menoth. In the beginning, according to this story, two deities rose from the formless chaos. One was a masked paragon who sought order in all things. He created the world of Cain from the void and gave rise to the heavens, ordaining their orderly progression through the night skies of this new world. This was Menoth, the creator and lawgiver, and where he strode upon this primal world, humanity was born in his shadow. Yet he was not alone. From the dark of the night sky came the devourer worm. If Menoth is the apotheosis of order, then the beast of all shapes was chaos incarnate, an ever-changing monstrosity whose sole purpose was to slay, ravage, and consume all that it could set its teeth and claws upon. The two were natural enemies, and their brutal clashes shaped the very surface of the nascent world, shattering the land into continents and islands, digging great furrows in the earth, and pushing the mountains skyward. Such a young world could not survive such a titanic struggle, and soon the two gods withdrew to Yurkane, a spiritual reflection of the physical world, shaped, some say, by the nightmares of the devourer worm itself. Here the two powers could battle for all eternity, and have done so to this very day. The Trollkins, Orgrins, and Gobbers of Cain tell a different story of the creation of the world and its peoples. According to them, Dunia is the mother of all, a goddess whose body is synonymous with the very world itself, and she herself is responsible for all life that abounds on Cain, from the lowest blade of grass to the so-called higher peoples who built empires and mighty weapons of war. In their account, the goddess and the worm were each formed from the primordial fundament, and the various beasts and peoples of the world sprang forth in the aftermath of the worm's violent ravaging of Dunia's body. As the offspring of this union, those of Dunian ancestry, those who call themselves of the Morgur tribe in ancient times, often echo aspects of both parents. Not only the nurturing wisdom and tranquility of Dunia herself, but also the violent ferocity of the worm. In this story, Menoth was chosen from among the mightiest of Dunia's children. The goddess sought a champion who could defend her against the predations of the worm, and so she chose her most powerful hunter. Humans arose in the wake of Menoth's passing, with some joining him in the hunt while others turned their worship to his quarry. The other peoples of Cain have different stories about how their world came to be, stories that incorporate their own deities. The people of Ios, for example, were once extraordinarily close to their gods, whom they called the Divine Court, and who, their worshippers say, hailed from a region in Yurkane they call the Veld. But the Divine Court was plagued by misfortune. Ravenous forces from outside what mortals could understand as reality were waiting for a chance to pierce the veil of this world and feast upon the souls within. And these strange beings, known hereafter as infernals, set their sights upon the Iosan gods. In order to escape, the members of the Divine Court came to live among their creations in Cain by traveling across a device called the Bridge of Worlds, and ended up collapsing the passage behind them. Although the cause of the calamity is unknown, the collapse of the bridge resulted in a terrible disaster the Iosans would call the Cataclysm, an event that brought their formerly grand empire low and tore a ragged wound into the very face of the world, giving rise to the violent wastes known as the Stormlands, which are still ravaged by winds and lightning many centuries later. The Divine Court lived alongside the Elves for a period of time, eventually founding the forest-shrouded nation of Ios. Yet the gods, cut off from their home in Yurkane, began to fade and diminish, and in 840 BR they departed from their people. Almost exactly 700 years later, something very terrible happened in Ios. The priests of the absent Divine Court went mad overnight. Some took their own lives, others clawed their own eyes out, and others committed acts of unspeakable savagery against their very flocks. This moment came to be known as the Rivening, and it is believed that to have been caused by some calamity that befell the Divine Court, with only two of their number having survived, Skyra and Nisor, but neither of whom are in any condition to speak about what transpired and what happened to the other gods. All of this poorly is misunderstood by those beyond the borders of Ios, as the Iosans have been secretive and isolationist, who have never been comfortable sharing either their triumphs or tragedies with the outsiders. The dwarves of Rule tell another story. They believe they are descendants from the Great Fathers, the first dwarves, who were shaped from living stone by the god mountain Gore. Although they were intended to be the mountain's slaves, the 13 clever and skillful dwarves ultimately tricked and destroyed their creator. Then, from the fertile soils of the Air's River, they shaped the Clay Wives, the first matriarchs of the dwarven race. All rule folk today trace their lineage back to their first progenitors, or so the story goes. As the human followers of Menoth brought order to the world, building walls and nations during what is now called the Thousand Cities era, other gods eventually appeared among their number. The first of these were the twins, Maro and Thamar, siblings born of human parents. The twins proved to be radical thinkers whose teachings would upend centuries of tradition and either save humanity or doom it. Although Maro and Thamar shared much in common, they are as different as night and day. Maro saw the purpose of life as benevolence, mercy, and self-sacrifice rather than just blind obedience to the law of Menoth. In this way, he espouses independence, just as his sister did, although hers was more revolutionary, as it emphasized personal empowerment by acquiring the knowledge in pursuit of an individual enlightenment. The twins' differing paths eventually led them into conflict, and Thamar ultimately slew her brother in a display of mystical might on the walls of Caspia, before Maro's followers promptly tore to pieces. Upon their deaths, both siblings ascended to godhood, and their writings and teachings were both ultimately collected and codified together into the Enchiridion, the holy texts of the Moravian faith and a key document to Thamarites. By proving that individual humans had the power to obtain divinity, the twins gave countless souls an alternative to the worship of Menoth. This caused a deadly schism of faith, and many thousands were put to the flame by Menite scrutadors. However, this was not the end of their story. Although the rise of the twins had significant political, social, and theological repercussions for the people of Cain, perhaps the greatest impact of their ascendancy was yet to come. In 600 BR, the first massive black ships of the Orgoth, the invaders from unknown lands to the west, landed upon the shores of western Imran. Within a few hundred years, the Orgoth had conquered most of the continent's kingdoms. The Orgoth commanded terrible magic that made it all but impossible for the humans of the Thousand Cities to stand against them. The invaders slew countless numbers and enslaved many thousands more until all of western Imran was subjugated by their dark rule. All seemed lost until Thamar brought the gift to humanity. Sometimes called the gift of magic, it marked the beginning of the rise of sorcery in humans, innate magical ability that was often greeted with fear and superstition, but ultimately allowed humans to band together and find the means to cast off the Orgoth oppressors. But the gift did not come without a price. To bring humanity such a potent weapon, Thamar was forced to make a terrible bargain. Having approached her twin about her plans, Maro looked into the future and saw only one course that could spare their followers the yoke of the Orgoth, and he gave his sister the approval to carry out the plan. In order to save humanity, Thamar brokered a deal with the eldritch things that waited in the outer abyss, clawing at the edges of reality. These were beings of infinite hunger, with power akin to the gods, and among those were willing to help, for a price. The foul gods of the Orgoth were in fact these very infernal creatures, yet they were not all unified or aligned as one. The infernals were organized into groups, known as orders, who warred with each other, and Thamar brought her case to the infernal group known as the Non-Enchiridion Order, who were enemies of the Orgoth's patron gods. She was able to wrest the gift of magic from those horrific beings, but the price they demanded was terrible indeed. Centuries hence, they would come to claim their due, an event which the world now knows as the Claiming. These are the deities most commonly worshipped in the cities and towns of western Imran, But they're not the only ones. In the nightmare empire of Crix, the dragon father Toruk is revered as a living god, and some of his scaled dragonic offspring are venerated as well. In the swamps and backwaters of the world, gatormen and bog trogs worship a predatory god called Kosk, believing him to be some sort of manifestation of the worm. Most recently, an astronomer of the former Fraternal Order of Wizardry discovered a heretofore unseen celestial body in the heavens. He had discovered Cyrus, the clockwork goddess, the maiden of gears, who is worshipped as the divinity of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. The cult of Cyrus was initially an underground organization whose adherents worshipped in secret, sometimes even replaced their own flesh with clockwork machines. But in recent years, since the claiming, worship of the maiden has grown among the peoples of the Iron Kingdoms. Mar and Thamar were the first humans to ascend to godhood, but they were not the first to defy the will of Menoth. Forgotten to history were a handful of mortals, whose self-determination was so strong they could actually bend the very reality around them to their will. They were the first to see the spark of divinity within humanity, and they perceived the edicts of the lawgiver as slavery, both in this life and the next. The names of these individuals have been lost over time, and those who speak of them all simply call them the Defiers. For their refusal to submit, they were punished in terrible fashion, cast alive into a hell within Urkane that the Creator believed they would never be able to escape from. Following the examples set by their deities, over the centuries certain particularly devout or especially outstanding followers of Morrow, as well as those of his sister Thamar, had joined the twins in Urkane as either ascendants, as those Morrowinds are called, or scions, as those who achieved apotheosis on Thamar's path are known. Some of these holy beings were once priests or members of the clergy, but many were simply individuals who best embodied certain aspects of the teachings of the twins. Throughout the lands known as the Iron Kingdoms, history is divided up into two distinct epochs, defined by the struggle against the Orgoth. Those years before the start of the rebellion against the Orgoth count backwards and are listed as BR, or before rebellion, while those that follow the count forward and are listed as AR, or after rebellion. Some have suggested a new era began with the claiming, but thus far, no nation has adopted such a system for its calendar.